Greetings, YouTube. Today I'm looking at an actual U.S. military manual. This is the FM 3-4 NBC Protection from the Headquarters Department of the Army. And on the cover we have a soldier in full protective gear and a Quonset hut in the background, which I think is designed to show that it's got some kind of filtration system in it because it's got a hose coming out of one of the ends. Now, I picked this up at a flea market for $5. I have no idea what it's actually worth. This is the 1985 edition of this book. This supersedes two previous editions, one that was put out in the 60s, one was put out in the 70s, and I assume that they have also put them out in the 90s and in this century as well. Maybe they're putting another one right now. I picked it up for a couple of reasons. One is a historical document. I was raised as a child of the Cold War. I picked it up as a resource for role-playing games, and I picked it up as a framing for understanding the thinking of military at the time of the publication. Now, realize that the military thinking is often decades behind the real world. So they were still fighting the Cold War in '85. It didn't matter if the Cold War was effectively never going to happen. We now know that. But they were still fighting the war of the 1960s. And this was supposed to help soldiers survive that war. An all-out attack between two superpowers or more that was going to be using nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons. Now, I've never served in the military. My family has a history of military service, and I've known a number of people in my life who have served in the military and actually had to use the gear depicted in this image. And this book covers the use of the gear, its care, its when the appropriate time to wear which part of the gear is. It covers the types of habitats that you need to function in. It tells you how to the best use your environment to help you survive a nuclear blast. In the foxhole was interesting that if you're in an open foxhole, and the best position to be for nuclear blast is actually on your back with your arms and legs up in sort of a vertical fetal position. The reasoning being that your arms and legs will absorb more of the nuclear radiation, and it will protect your brain and your vital organs. Because as they repeat repeatedly in here, continuing the mission is job one. Continue the mission, continue the mission, continue the mission. This is an indictment of the thinking of our military. Because it isn't just that we were expecting our soldiers to win a war. We were expecting them to be just ground up and spit out at the end. Now, I have nothing but respect for those who serve the military honorably. My ire lies with those that command them. And this book shows the callousness it has towards them. First of all, of the people I've known who've had to use this gear, the most they had to use it at any one time was 3 days. It's part of their training process. And in that time, most of them prepare themselves by either completely evacuating their bowels utterly and then wearing diapers for urine so they don't have to worry about changing this thing. Wearing these things is miserable. It's horrible. Even for a 72-hour time period, these suits are a nightmare. But to expect soldiers to be combat effective inside these suits for weeks at a time, at the minimum, if not longer, depending on the environment of the battlefield, was an act of insanity. This book is just insane. To expect that soldiers would be able to keep themselves shaved so that their masks fit their faces properly in a field. I should say in the field. That they're going to be able to handle all of the equipment that they're using properly, covered in these uniforms. these overcovers. Remember, these suits are worn on top of your BDUs. And what happens when you remember that in the field that the vital piece of equipment you need is now inside the pocket on your leg underneath this suit, and if you open the suit, you will die. And the housing they talk about in here. The clean shelters that allow the soldiers to get out of their suits, or at least partially, so they can do things like clean themselves up or eat, because you can't eat inside these things. In fact, when they just talk specifically about some of the uses, some of the limitations of the suit, there's like one section goes that there are no policies, there is no procedure for eating while wearing this thing. But they're talking about making sure you have enough water. They're talking about using these suits in different environments: Arctic, temperate, jungle, desert, urban, and how they vary in their effectiveness. Well, I could still see myself using this as a reference as a role-playing game. It falls into that right after the event thing. And that's a window I don't like for games. I don't like to put things into a window where I could project to myself, or I could potentially be alive during that process. I prefer to deal with the apocalypse long after I would be dead, either from the war itself or from old age. So I don't have to worry about the projecting myself into that scene. But mostly, this is a really depressing book. Interesting, don't get me wrong, but depressing. Both depressing in its nature and depressing in the mental processes that got this thing made. That decided that our soldiers were of much import to the U.S. military and to the U.S. government as the rounds in their magazines.